I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. Mornings were my favorite part of the day, a time when the world felt fresh, unsullied by the complications that inevitably unfolded. I'd sit by the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the early sunlight stretch across the backyard, illuminating the garden Molly and I had planted together years ago. But lately, those mornings had felt hollow. Molly, always on the go, seemed more distracted than ever. That Friday morning was no different. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, her free hand absent-mindedly stirring her tea. "I'll be leaving after lunch," she said, not looking up. "Work retreat. Just a couple of days." Her words hung in the air, casual and practiced, as though she'd rehearsed them. My stomach tightened, though I smiled and nodded. "Sounds good. Where's this one at?" She glanced up briefly, her lips curling into a polite, almost distant smile. "Same place as last time. Just team-building stuff. Nick and I are presenting a case study on budget allocation." There it was again. Nick. The name seemed to hover around her lately, popping up in conversations where it didn't belong. Her tone carried a strange warmth whenever she mentioned him, a sharp contrast to the coolness she developed toward me. I wanted to ask questions, push back against the growing doubts in my mind, but I held back. The truth was, I wasn't ready to confront the answers I feared. Instead, I simply said, "Have a good time." She nodded, rising from the table. "Thanks. I'll see you Sunday night." As she disappeared into the bedroom to pack, I stared into my coffee, the bitter taste suddenly matching the mood in the room. Something wasn't right. Molly had been taking more of these trips lately, always with Nick, always just a work thing. Her once bubbly enthusiasm for our time together had dulled, replaced by a veneer of politeness that felt more like an obligation than affection. For the past month, I tried to convince myself it was just a rough patch. Work stress, maybe. Or the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But deep down, I knew better. The signs were too glaring to ignore. The late-night text messages she claimed were work updates. The subtle but persistent shift in her demeanor. And then, there was the perfume, a scent she never wore for me but seemed to favor on these so-called retreats. After she left, I sat in silence, the weight of my suspicions pressing heavily on my chest. I needed to know the truth. No more guessing, no more turning a blind eye. That afternoon, I took the first step down a path I couldn't have imagined just days earlier. Molly's laptop was tucked neatly into her home office desk. She rarely used it at home, preferring her phone for emails and social media, which made it the perfect place to start. I hesitated as I opened the screen, my hands trembling slightly. It felt wrong, invasive. But then I thought of Nick, his name, his face, the growing presence he seemed to have in our lives. If Molly wasn't willing to give me the truth, I would find it myself. The first few minutes were uneventful. Work files, spreadsheets, a few personal photos. Nothing incriminating. But then, buried in a folder labeled miscellaneous, I found an email thread. It was nothing overt, just exchanges between Molly and Nick about an upcoming project. Yet, the tone was unmistakable. Their messages were playful, laced with inside jokes and a familiarity that went beyond professional camaraderie. I scrolled further, my pulse quickening. One email, dated a month ago, made my stomach churn. "Nick, can't wait for the next retreat. Feels like forever since the last one. I'll save us a seat on the beach. Molly, looking forward to it too. Let's make sure we get some downtime this time, just us." The words burned into my mind. Just us. There it was, in plain text, the confirmation I'd dreaded. My hands clenched into fists as I stared at the screen, a storm of emotions swirling within me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, but most of all, a cold, calculated clarity. If Molly thought she could play me for a fool, she was about to learn otherwise. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, my thoughts racing. Confronting her outright wouldn't work, not yet. I needed more than a few emails to uncover the full scope of her deceit. I needed evidence, something undeniable. And I knew just where to start. That evening, I reached out to a private investigator. A friend of mine had used one during his divorce, and though I never imagined I'd be in the same position, I wasn't above taking a page from his playbook. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, listened patiently as I explained the situation. Her voice was calm, professional, but tinged with sympathy. "Leave it to me," she said. "By the end of the weekend, you'll have everything you need." Hanging up the phone, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, my dreams unclouded by doubt. I had a plan, and soon, the truth would be mine. The next day passed in a haze. I busied myself with errands, yard work, anything to keep my mind off what might be happening at that resort. Every now and then, I'd glance at my phone, half expecting a message from Claire with some damning revelation. But the hours dragged on, and the silence only fed my anxiety. By Sunday afternoon, I was on edge. Molly was due back that evening, and I still hadn't heard from Claire. I checked my phone obsessively, the tension building with each passing minute. Finally, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Check your email." I opened the app, my heart pounding. Attached to the email were photos, Molly and Nick, arm in arm, walking into a resort. Another shot showed them by the pool, laughing, their faces alight with a joy I hadn't seen in years. The final photo was the nail in the coffin, the two of them on a secluded beach, her head resting on his shoulder as they gazed at the waves. I stared at the images, my hands shaking. This was it. The proof I needed. But as the initial wave of anger subsided, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't going to yell or scream or beg for explanations. No, I was going to be smarter than that. If Molly wanted to destroy our life together, I'd make sure she paid the price. By the time Molly walked through the front door Sunday night, I was ready. The house was spotless, dinner was simmering on the stove, and a bottle of wine sat uncorked on the counter. I had gone through the motions of normalcy so thoroughly that I almost believed them myself. Almost. "Hey," she said, stepping inside with her suitcase. Her voice had that careful neutrality I'd grown accustomed to, the tone of someone hiding something just beneath the surface. "Smells good in here." "Thought I'd cook something special," I replied, turning from the stove with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "How was the retreat?" She hesitated, just for a moment, before setting her suitcase down and walking into the kitchen. "Same as usual. Meetings, presentations, lots of networking. Pretty exhausting, honestly." I watched her carefully as she spoke, noting the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze avoided mine. "Glad to have you home," I said. "You must be starving." She nodded, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Yeah, I could eat." We sat down to dinner, the clinking of silverware and low hum of conversation filling the room. I kept the topics light: work, upcoming plans, anything that didn't hint at the storm brewing beneath the surface. Molly seemed to relax as the evening went on, her guard slipping just enough for me to see the woman I used to know. But I wasn't fooled. I knew what lay beneath the surface, and tonight was about setting the stage. As we finished dinner, I poured her another glass of wine and leaned back in my chair. "You know," I said casually, "I was thinking we should plan a trip soon. Just the two of us. It's been a while since we've had a proper getaway." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, surprise flashing across her face. "That sounds nice," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Where were you thinking?" "Somewhere quiet," I said. "Maybe the mountains." A place where we can reconnect. She nodded, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah, that could be good. I let the conversation drift after that, not wanting to press too hard. There was no need to push her yet. The trap was already set, all I had to do was wait. The next morning, while Molly was at work, I set the rest of my plan in motion. First, I called our bank. Over the past few weeks, I'd been quietly transferring money out of our joint account into one solely under my name. It wasn't much, just enough to cover myself if things went south. But now, with the proof of her betrayal sitting in my inbox, I wasn't taking any chances. By noon, the bulk of our savings was safely in my account. Next, I called my lawyer. Eric was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the type you wanted in your corner when things got messy. I forwarded him the photos and emails from Claire, along with a brief explanation of the situation. His response was immediate. "This is solid evidence," he said. "If you're ready to file, we can move quickly. Given the circumstances, you'll likely get the house and a favorable split of assets." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Do it. I want this wrapped up as soon as possible." "Consider it done," he said. "And William, stay calm. The last thing you need is to give her any ammunition." "Don't worry," I replied. "I've got this." With the legal side handled, I turned my attention to the next phase of my plan. Claire had provided not just photos but a detailed itinerary of Molly's weekend with Nick, including their check-ins and reservations. Armed with that information, I composed an email to Molly's boss. It was polite, professional, and devastatingly effective. Subject: concern regarding employee conduct. Body: Dear Mr. Jeffries, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to bring to your attention a matter that may impact the reputation of your firm. Over the weekend, my wife, Molly Harrison, attended what was purported to be a work retreat. However, I have reason to believe the trip was used for personal purposes, including an extramarital relationship with a colleague, Nick Thompson. Please find attached photos and evidence for your review. Respectfully, William Harrison. I hit send and sat back, my heart pounding. It was a cold move, but necessary. Molly's job was her lifeline, her pride. If she wanted to play games, I would make sure she understood the stakes. By the time Molly came home that evening, everything was in place. She walked through the door, her face lighting up when she saw me in the living room. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag by the couch. "How was your day?" I looked up from my book, forcing a smile. "Not bad. How about yours?" She hesitated, just for a moment, before replying. "Busy. Lots of catching up to do after the weekend." I nodded, my smile tightening. "Sounds like you've got a lot on your plate." As she moved to sit beside me, I felt a pang of sadness. There had been a time when I would have done anything to protect her, to shield her from pain. But now, as I watched her settle into the couch, all I could think about was the betrayal that had brought us here. We spent the evening in quiet companionship, a facade of normalcy that neither of us truly believed. But beneath the surface, the wheels of justice were already turning. And soon, Molly would have to face the consequences of her choices. The call came earlier than I expected. Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee, Molly's boss, Mr. Jeffries, reached out. His voice was tight, professional, but tinged with unmistakable discomfort. "Mr. Harrison, this is Mr. Jeffries. I received your email yesterday regarding Molly. I'd like to discuss this further, if possible." I leaned back in my chair, the satisfaction washing over me like a wave. "Of course. What do you need from me? Can you confirm that the attached materials are authentic? And are you absolutely certain these events occurred during company-sanctioned time and at company expense?" I almost felt sorry for the guy. He sounded like someone struggling to balance professionalism with a desire to avoid scandal. Almost. I can assure you they are authentic, I said evenly. The timestamps matched the weekend Molly and Nick were supposed to be on a work retreat. There was a pause on the other end, then a resigned sigh. Understood. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll handle it internally. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of my victory. This was the first domino, the beginning of the end for the carefully constructed facade Molly had built around her double life. I knew Mr. Jeffries wouldn't waste time addressing the issue. By the end of the day, Molly and Nick would face the fallout. Molly came home late that evening, her face pale and drawn. I could tell from the moment she walked through the door that something had shifted. She set her bag down carefully, avoiding my gaze as she moved into the kitchen. I followed, leaning casually against the counter. Tough day? I asked, my tone light, almost playful. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. You knew. The words hit like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. Knew what? Don't play dumb, William. Her voice wavered, a mix of anger and fear. Jeffries called us into his office this afternoon. He had photos, emails. He said someone reported us. Was it you? I crossed my arms, meeting her gaze steadily. What difference does it make? You made your choices, Molly. Now you have to live with them. Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened, her expression hardening. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted, my voice cold. You think you can lie to me, betray me, and walk away unscathed? You're lucky I didn't do worse. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, she turned and stormed upstairs, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the house. I stayed where I was, my hands gripping the counter as I tried to steady my breathing. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd expected, but it still left a bitter taste in my mouth. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Eric, to finalize the divorce paperwork. He went over the documents with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him one of the most sought-after attorneys in town. You'll keep the house, he said, tapping the page with his pen. And given the evidence we've gathered, the court will likely rule in your favor on the financial split. Molly's infidelity gives us a strong case. I nodded, my mind elsewhere. The reality of what I was doing was beginning to sink in. For years, this house had been our sanctuary, the place where we built our life together. Now, it would be mine alone. And the joint accounts? I asked. Already frozen, Eric replied. You'll have full access once the divorce is finalized. I thanked him and left, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. The satisfaction of exposing Molly's lies was tempered by the realization that I was dismantling the life we'd built piece by piece. But there was no turning back now. By Thursday, the storm had fully descended. Molly's job was gone, Jeffries hadn't wasted time cutting ties with her and Nick. She spent the day at home, alternating between anger and despair. I stayed out of her way, focusing on the final stages of my plan. That evening, she cornered me in the living room. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice hoarse from crying. Why are you doing this? I set down the book I'd been pretending to read and looked at her. Why am I doing this? Molly, you lied to me. You cheated on me. And you thought I wouldn't find out? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for. Don't, I cut her off, my voice sharp. Don't insult me by pretending it was a mistake. You made a choice, Molly. Now you're facing the consequences. She sank onto the couch, her body trembling with silent sobs. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the photos, the emails, the betrayal that had shattered our life together. Any sympathy I might have felt was quickly replaced by resolve. "You should start packing," I said, rising to my feet. "The paperwork will be finalized soon. You'll need to find somewhere else to stay." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "William, please." "It's over, Molly," I said firmly. "You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." As I walked upstairs, her sobs echoed through the house, a haunting reminder of the life we were leaving behind. But for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out, the lies exposed. And though the road ahead would be difficult, I knew I was finally free. The house was eerily quiet in the days following our confrontation. Molly moved around like a shadow, her presence a faint echo of the woman I had once loved. I kept my distance, spending long hours at work or out on errands that didn't need running. The air between us was heavy with things left unsaid, but I had no interest in saying them. The paperwork was with the court now, and soon, the chapter of my life that included Molly would be closed for good. It was Friday evening when the knock on the door came. I wasn't expecting anyone, so the sight of Nick standing on my porch was as surprising as it was infuriating. He looked disheveled, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that made him seem smaller somehow. "What the hell are you doing here?" I growled, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. "I need to talk to Molly," he said, his voice low and desperate. "Please." I stared at him, my anger flaring. "You've done enough. Get the hell off my property." "William, please." He took a step closer, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "I didn't mean to what? Sleep with my wife? Destroy my marriage?" My voice rose, and I could feel the tension in my chest building. "You don't get to come here and beg for absolution." Nick swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the door. "I just need to explain things to her." She doesn't want to see you," I snapped, cutting him off. "And if you don't leave right now, I'll make sure you regret it." Nick hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the night. I stood on the porch for a long time, the cool air biting at my skin, before finally going back inside. Molly was in the living room when I entered, sitting on the couch with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Who was it?" "No one," I said curtly, brushing past her. "Was it Nick?" she pressed, her voice trembling. "What did he want?" I stopped in the doorway, my back to her. "Does it matter? He's gone." I didn't wait for her response, retreating upstairs and closing the door to the guest room where I had been sleeping. The anger from my encounter with Nick simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to push it down. This would all be over soon. The next morning, I woke to silence. Not the usual quiet of a lazy Saturday, but a stillness that felt wrong somehow. I got up and went downstairs, expecting to find Molly in the kitchen or the living room, but the house was empty. Her car was still in the driveway, but her purse and keys were gone. A strange unease settled in my chest as I checked every room, calling her name. No answer. It wasn't until I opened the door to the garage that I found her. She was sitting in the driver's seat of her car, the garage door closed and the engine off. Her head was tilted back against the headrest, her eyes closed, and her face pale. At first, I thought she was sleeping, but then I saw the empty bottle of pills in her lap. "Molly!" I shouted, rushing to her side. I yanked open the car door, my hands trembling as I shook her. "Molly, wake up!" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "William," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why?" My voice cracked, the anger and fear colliding in a storm of emotion. "Why would you do this?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to speak. "I I couldn't, anymore. I didn't want to lose you. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely press the buttons. Stay with me, Molly, I said, my voice breaking. Help is on the way. She gave me a weak smile, her hand reaching out to touch my face. I'm sorry, she murmured, her voice fading. I'm so sorry. The paramedics arrived moments later, pulling her from the car and rushing her to the hospital. I followed behind, the drive a blur of flashing lights and pounding fear. When I arrived, they wouldn't let me see her right away. I sat in the waiting room, my mind racing with thoughts of what I should have said, what I could have done differently. Hours passed before a doctor finally came to speak to me. His expression was grave, and I knew before he said a word. She didn't make it. The world seemed to tilt around me, the weight of his words crashing down like a tidal wave. Molly was gone. The woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me, was gone. And all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of loss. In the end, the revenge I had sought so meticulously had taken more than I ever intended. It had left me alone, hollow, and haunted by the knowledge that I had played a part in her destruction. There was no satisfaction, no victory, only the bitter sting of regret.